The ship drifted through the empty blackness of space, silent and broken. The Starfall had been a proud vessel once, its sleek blue hull gleaming as it carried trade goods between star systems. Now it floated helplessly, most of its systems dead or dying. On the bridge, Captain Mox gripped the edge of the command chair with his 4 upper limbs. His large compound eyes reflected the dim emergency lights that cast red shadows across the deck. The air felt thin already, and a warning light blinked steadily on the life support panel. "Report," he said, his voice steady despite the fear gripping him. Engineer Trell moved from one console to another, her thin fingers tapping at controls that barely responded. Unlike the captain, she couldn't hide her distress. Her normally bluish skin had paled to an unhealthy gray. "Main engines are completely dead," she said. "The radiation belt we passed through burned out most of our systems. Backup power is at 26% and dropping." "Communications?" Mox asked. From his station, Officer Lax looked up. "Emergency beacon is broadcasting on all standard frequencies." But he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The Starfall had ventured far from regular trade routes. The ship's owners had insisted on this shortcut to save time and fuel. Now that decision might cost them all their lives. "How long do we have?" Mox finally asked the question no one wanted to hear. Trell hesitated before answering. "Life support will fail in about 6 hours. After that," her voice trailed off. 6 hours until the air became toxic. 6 hours until the 8 crew members of the Starfall would begin to suffocate. "Is there any way to extend it?" Mox pressed. "We could shut down all non-essential systems," Trell suggested. "Seal off unused sections of the ship. It might buy us another hour or 2. Mox nodded. "Do it." The bridge fell silent as the crew worked. The lights dimmed further as power was diverted to life support. Temperature dropped as heating systems were shut down. One by one, the doors to unused compartments were sealed, concentrating the remaining good air in the central sections of the ship. Dr. Rin entered the bridge, medical kit in hand. "Captain, we should discuss what to do if rescue doesn't come in time," she said quietly. "I have sedatives that would make the end easier." Mox's antennae twitched, a sign of distress among his kind. "Let's hope it doesn't come to that, Doctor." "The chances of someone picking up our signal out here are very small," said Navigator Paz from his station. "And even if they did, who would risk themselves for strangers?" It was a valid point. The crew of the Starfall belonged to a species known as the Viren, insect-like beings from a distant world. They weren't well known in this part of space. Most ships passing by would likely ignore the distress call, assuming it was a trap set by pirates. "We should record final messages," suggested Lax, "for our families." Mox stood abruptly. "No, not yet. We still have time, and giving up now won't help anyone." He moved to the main viewport and looked out at the stars. "Keep broadcasting the distress signal. Maximum power." "But Captain, that will drain our reserves faster," Trell protested. "What good is saving power if no one knows we're here?" Mox countered. "Broadcast on all frequencies, all languages in our database." As the crew carried out his orders, Mox stared out at the cold, distant stars. His people believed that the spirits of their ancestors dwelled among those points of light, watching over them. He wondered if they were watching now. The minutes ticked by slowly. The air grew colder. The bridge crew tried to conserve energy by moving less, speaking less. Each breath was carefully measured, each word considered before being spoken. Then suddenly, a soft beep came from the communications console. Lax jumped up straight, his tired eyes widening. "Captain," he called, voice trembling with excitement. "Someone's responding to our signal." The crew froze, hardly daring to hope. "Put it through," Mox ordered, heart pounding. Static filled the bridge speakers, and then a voice, speaking a language none of them recognized at first. The ship's translator worked quickly, converting the unfamiliar sounds. Unknown vessel. This is independent freighter * Wanderer *. I'm receiving your distress call. What's your situation? Can you respond? The voice belonged to a species the Viren had only heard stories about. A species known for being unpredictable, resourceful, and sometimes dangerous. A human. Silence fell over the bridge of the Starfall *. The alien voice crackled through the speakers again. Unknown vessel, please respond. This is the Wanderer *. I'm picking up your distress signal. Captain Mox turned to his communications officer. Is this real, Lax? Not some kind of system error. Lax's fingers flew across his console. It's real, Captain. The signal is coming from a small ship about 3 hours away at maximum speed. He paused, checking his readings. It appears to be a human vessel. The crew exchanged glances. Humans were rare in this part of space. Most Viren had never seen one in person. They were known to be adaptable and resilient, but also unpredictable. Should we answer? Asked Trell, the engineer. What if they're pirates disguised as rescuers? Mox's antennae twitched as he considered their options. With only 6 hours of breathable air left, they couldn't afford to be cautious. We have no choice, he decided. Open the channel, Lax. Lax pressed a button and nodded to the captain. This is Captain Mox of the trading vessel Starfall *, he said, trying to keep his voice steady. We've suffered catastrophic system failure after passing through an uncharted radiation belt. Life support is critical. We have 8 crew members on board. There was a moment of silence, then the human voice returned, clearer now. Captain Mox, I'm Dan Miller of the Wanderer *. I'm about 3 hours from your position. The human paused. What species are you? I'll need to know to prepare my ship's environment. We are Viren, Mox replied. We require a methane-nitrogen atmosphere with trace elements of hydrogen sulfide. Another pause. Mox felt his heart sink. Most species found the Viren's breathing requirements impossible to accommodate. Their atmosphere was poisonous to most oxygen breathers, just as oxygen was toxic to Viren. I see, the human finally responded. That's going to complicate things, but we can work with it. My cargo hold can be sealed, and the atmosphere adjusted. It won't be comfortable, but it should keep you alive until we reach a proper station. Hope flickered in Mox's chest. You can help us. I'll try my best, Miller replied. Send me your ship's specifications and your environmental requirements. My AI will calculate what we need. Lax immediately began transmitting the requested information. The rest of the crew watched anxiously. Captain, Trell said quietly, approaching Mox's chair. Even if this human can reach us in 3 hours, our life support will only last for 6. That gives us very little margin for error. And what if it's a trap? Added Navigator Paz. Humans are known to be unpredictable. They're also known to be curious and helpful, countered Dr. Rin. The stories say they've pulled off impossible rescues before. Mox raised a hand to silence the debate. We're sending our information to the human. Unless anyone has a better suggestion. No one spoke. They all knew the truth. Without help, they would die. The human's voice came through again. I've received your specs. Preparing my ship now. There was a slight change in his tone. I should warn you, I'm pushing my engines beyond safety limits to reach you faster. If they blow, we're both in trouble. Why would you take such a risk for strangers? Mox couldn't help asking. There was a pause before Miller responded. Out here, we're all just trying to survive. Today it's you. Tomorrow it might be me. His voice lightened slightly. Besides, I've never met a Viren before. Seems worth the trip. For the first time in hours, Mox felt something like hope. The human is accelerating, reported Lax, watching his instruments. Estimated arrival now in 2 hours. 40 minutes. Still cutting it close, muttered Trell. Our air will be getting toxic by then. A new alarm began to sound. its shrill tone cutting through the bridge. Trell rushed to her engineering station. "Captain, the primary life support system just failed completely. We're on emergency backup only." "How long?" Mox demanded. Trell's face went ashen. 4 hours, maybe less." Mox turned back to the communication system. "Miller, our situation has worsened. Life support failing faster than expected." "Understood," came the human's calm reply. "I'm going to try something that might help. Stand by." The crew of the Starfall looked at each other nervously. Their lives now depended on a stranger from a species they barely understood, racing through space to reach them. And the clock was ticking. Dan Miller sat in the pilot's chair of the Wanderer his hands moving quickly over the controls. The small freighter wasn't built for speed, but he was pushing it harder than he ever had before. Warning lights flashed across his console, indicating that the engines were overheating. "Just hold together a little longer," he muttered to his ship. The Wanderer had been Dan's home for the past 7 years. It wasn't much to look at, an older model cargo hauler with patches and repairs visible across its hull. But it was reliable, and it had gotten him out of tight spots before. This time, though, he wasn't trying to save himself. He was racing to rescue 8 aliens he'd never met. "Computer, show me everything we have on the Viren species," Dan commanded. The ship's AI displayed what little information was available. Insect-like beings from a distant system, evolved on a methane-rich world. Peaceful traders, not well known in this sector. Toxic to most oxygen breathers, and vice versa. Dan scratched his beard. "Well, that complicates things." He checked the status of his cargo hold. He'd jettisoned most of his cargo, machine parts bound for the mining colony on Ta City VI. They'd be upset about the delay, but this was an emergency. The empty hold would give the Viren space, and he could adjust the atmosphere using his ship's environmental systems. "Computer, begin converting cargo hold atmosphere to match Viren requirements. Seal it off from the rest of the ship." "Warning," the AI responded. "Creating methane-nitrogen atmosphere. This will use 68% of remaining chemical reserves." "Do it anyway," Dan ordered. He opened the communication channel again. "Captain Mox, how are your people holding up?" There was a delay before the alien captain responded. "We are managing. The air is becoming difficult to breathe. Our medical officer is helping the most affected crew members." Dan could hear the strain in the translator's version of Mox's voice. "I'm still about 2 hours out. Is there anything you can do to stretch your air supply? We've sealed off all non-essential areas." The entire crew is now on the bridge. A pause. "We're discussing whether to enter hibernation stasis to conserve oxygen." Dan frowned. "Is that safe?" "Not without proper preparation. There's a 20% chance some would not wake up." "Then don't do it," Dan said firmly. "Not yet. I've got another idea." Dan had spent years exploring the frontier, often alone. He'd learned to solve problems with whatever was available. Now he examined the schematics of the Viren ship that they had transmitted. "Captain Mox, do you have emergency spacesuits on board?" "Yes, but only 4 functional ones remain after the system failure." "That's good," Dan replied. "Here's what we're going to do." He explained his plan. The Viren with suits would take turns going outside the ship to the secondary hull vents. There, they could manually cycle the bad air out and pull in raw materials from the ship's exterior tanks. It wouldn't be perfect breathing air, but it might buy them the extra time needed. "It's dangerous," Mox observed. "If we lose someone outside the ship." "It's a risk," Dan admitted, "but it might give us the time we need." While the Viren considered his suggestion, Dan worked on his own preparations. He pulled his emergency EVA suit from storage and checked its systems. If the alien ship's airlock was compatible with his suit, he might be able to board and help directly. "We will try your suggestion," Mox finally announced. "Officer Lax and Engineer Trell are preparing now." Dan nodded, even though they couldn't see him. "Good. I'll talk them through it." For the next hour, Dan guided the alien crew through the dangerous procedure. One by one, the Viren in spacesuits ventured outside their failing ship, working to extend their dwindling air supply. Despite the translator's flat tones, Dan could sense their fear. Space was unforgiving, and one small mistake could be fatal. Yet they followed his instructions carefully, showing remarkable courage. "Why are you helping us?" Mox asked during a quiet moment. "Most ships would have ignored our signal." Dan looked out at the stars through his view screen. "My grandfather was a rescue pilot back on Earth. He taught me that space is dangerous enough without us turning our backs on each other." He smiled slightly. "Besides, I've always wanted to meet new species." "Your directness is unexpected," Mox replied. "In our culture, we would spend many hours exchanging formal greetings before discussing personal matters." Dan laughed. "Well, when I get there, you can teach me the proper way to say hello. Right now, let's focus on keeping your people alive until then." On his navigation screen, Dan could finally see the asterisk, Starfall asterisk, a small dot in the distance, growing slowly larger. The alien ship's unusual design became clearer as he approached, elongated and angular, with what looked like sensory arrays extending from its hull. "Captain Mox," Dan transmitted, "I have visual contact with your vessel. I'll be there in 30 minutes. The air on the bridge of the asterisk, Starfall asterisk, had grown thick and heavy. Each breath the Viren crew took was more labored than the last. Captain Mox watched the vital signs of his crew on a small monitor. 2 of them were already showing signs of oxygen deprivation, their normally blue skin turning a sickly gray color. "Status report," Mox ordered, fighting to keep his own breathing steady. Trell had just returned from her second spacewalk. She removed her helmet with shaking hands. "The procedure worked partially, Captain. I managed to cycle some of the bad air and introduce new elements from the reserve tanks." She paused to catch her breath. "But the mixture isn't stable. It's buying us time, but not much." Dr. Rin moved between crew members, administering breathing treatments from her rapidly depleting medical supplies. "We need to rotate who gets the breathing masks," she told Mox quietly. "I can't treat everyone at once." Mox nodded grimly. "How much longer until our air becomes toxic?" "At current rates," Trell consulted her portable scanner, "about 50 minutes. 50 minutes, and the human was still 30 minutes away. Even if he arrived on time, they would need to transfer to his ship, which would take additional time. The math was not in their favor. Lax called from his station. "Captain, the human is hailing us again." "Put him through," Mox ordered. "Captain Mox." Dan's voice came through clearly now that he was closer. "I've been analyzing your ship's schematics. There's a problem with my original plan." Mox felt his heart sink. "What problem?" "Your airlock," Dan explained. "It's designed specifically for Viren physiology. My suit won't seal properly with it, which means I can't come aboard to help you directly." There was a pause. "And my cargo hold might not be readied in time for all of you." The bridge fell silent as the implications sank in. "Then we are lost," Navigator Paz said quietly. "Not yet," Dan responded, having heard the comment. "I have another idea, but it's risky, really risky." Mox leaned forward. "We're listening, human." "I'm going to pull alongside your ship," Dan explained. "Then I'll extend my emergency docking collar. It's not designed for your ship model, but we can create a seal with emergency patches. Once connected, you can evacuate directly through the collar into my cargo hold." "Will that work?" Trell asked, her technical mind already analyzing the proposal. "Maybe," Dan admitted. "The problem is, the pressure difference might cause structural damage to both ships, and if the seal fails during transfer." He didn't need to finish. "If the seal broke while they were transferring, both ships would be exposed to vacuum. It would be catastrophic." "Computer," Dan called out on his ship, "calculate the odds of successful emergency docking with a Viren-class trader using standard emergency collar." His ship's AI responded promptly, estimating 48% chance of successful docking and transfer. Warning: extreme risk to both vessels. Mox heard this through the communication channel. Less than half a chance of survival. Yet, staying on the Starfall meant certain death. "We accept your plan, human," Mox declared. "What do we need to do?" Dan's voice became focused, professional. "Prepare your port side emergency hatch. Clear everything from that area. I'll align my ship and extend the collar. Have your strongest crew members ready with emergency sealant. We'll need to reinforce the connection once it's established." For the next 20 minutes, both crews worked frantically to prepare. On the Starfall Mox ordered all remaining power diverted to the emergency systems near the port hatch. Crew members gathered what emergency sealant they had left. On the Wanderer Dan maneuvered his ship carefully alongside the alien vessel. Matching velocity with another ship was always challenging, but doing so with a damaged ship whose stabilizers weren't functioning properly was nearly impossible. "Almost there," Dan transmitted, his voice tight with concentration. "Stand by for contact in 3, 2, 1. A dull thud resonated through both ships as the Wanderer's emergency docking collar made contact with the Starfall's hull. "Contact established," Dan called out. "Extending collar and attempting seal now." Trell and another crew member stood ready at the emergency hatch, emergency sealant dispensers in their hands. As the collar extended and pressed against their ship, they began applying the sealant around the edges. Alarms suddenly blared throughout the Starfall Hull integrity compromised in sections 8 through 12. Lax shouted, "We're losing atmosphere faster now. The connector is causing structural stress." Trell reported, still working frantically to seal the connection. "Our hull wasn't designed for this kind of docking." Mox made a quick decision. "Begin evacuation now. Dr. Rin, take the weakest crew members first." As the first Viren prepared to enter the makeshift connector, the entire ship shuddered violently. "Captain," Dan's voice came through urgently, "we're running out of time. My sensors show your hull is starting to buckle. You need to move now." The makeshift connector between the two ships groaned under the stress. Metal creaked and emergency sealant bubbled along the seams. Captain Mox stood at the emergency hatch, directing his crew through the narrow passage. "One at a time," he ordered, trying to maintain calm. "Move quickly but do not push." Dr. Rin helped the weakest crew member, a young navigator named Jiv, into the connector. The young Viren's breathing was shallow, his normally bright eyes dulled by the toxic air. Behind them, 3 more crew members waited their turn, leaning against the wall for support. Through the communications system, Dan's voice remained steady despite the tension. "That's it, nice and easy. I've got the first one coming through now." Inside the Wanderer's cargo hold, Dan had created a sealed chamber with the right atmosphere for the Viren. He wore his own environmental suit, as the methane mixture would be deadly to him. As the first alien emerged through the connector, Dan helped guide them to a padded area he'd prepared. The Starfall shuddered again, more violently this time. "Hull breach in Section 10. Trell shouted from her portable scanner. "Emergency bulkheads failing." "We need to move faster," Mox urged. "Trell, you go next." The engineer shook her head. "I need to stay and monitor the connection. If it fails while someone is inside." She didn't finish the sentence. They all knew what would happen. Back on the Wanderer Dan checked his ship's systems. The stress of the docking was affecting his vessel too. Warning lights flashed across his control panel. "Computer, how long can we maintain this connection?" he asked. "Estimating structural failure of connection in approximately 7 minutes, the AI responded. 7 minutes to evacuate 5 more Viren. It might be enough time, but only if nothing else went wrong. As the second and third crew members made it safely across, A new alarm sounded on the Starfall asterisk. Captain. Lax called from further inside the ship. The life support system just failed completely. The air will be lethal in less than 2 minutes. Mox made a split-second decision. Everyone to the connector now. No waiting. The remaining crew rushed forward. Lax helped Officer Paz, who was struggling to breathe. Behind them, the ship's lights flickered ominously. Dan, Mox called through the communication link. The situation has worsened. We're sending everyone through at once. Understood, Dan replied. But be careful in the connector. It can't handle too much weight at once. 3 more Viren entered the narrow passage. Now only Mox and Trell remained on the Starfall asterisk. You next, Captain, Trell insisted. No, Engineer. You go first, Mox ordered. A massive shudder ran through the ship. Metal screamed as the hull began to tear apart somewhere deep inside the vessel. No time to argue. Dan shouted through the link. Both of you, get in now. Mox pushed Trell into the connector, then followed immediately behind her. They crawled quickly through the narrow tube, the flexible walls pressing in around them. Ahead, Mox could see the opening into the human ship, a strange brightness beyond. Then the worst happened. The Starfall asterisk lurched violently to one side. The movement twisted the connector, creating a tear along one seam. Air began to hiss out into space. The connector is failing, Dan yelled. Move, move, move. Trell reached the end of the connector and Dan pulled her through into the cargo hold. Mox was just meters behind when the tear widened. The escaping air created a powerful suction, pulling him toward the breach. Mox's claws scrambled for purchase on the smooth surface of the connector. He felt himself sliding toward the opening and certain death. Suddenly, something grabbed his front limb. He looked up to see Dan, half inside the connector, stretching out to reach him. The human had anchored himself at the entrance and extended as far as he could into the failing tube. Grab on, Dan shouted, his voice muffled by his helmet. Mox reached out with all 4 of his upper limbs and caught the human's outstretched arm. With surprising strength, Dan pulled the alien captain toward him, fighting against the pull of the escaping air. Almost there, Dan grunted. Just a little more. With one final effort, Dan heaved Mox through the entrance and into the cargo hold. Instantly, he slammed his fist on the emergency release, sealing the hatch. The connector tore away completely, disappearing into space along with the dying Starfall asterisk. Inside the cargo hold, 8 exhausted Viren lay on the floor, breathing the life-giving atmosphere Dan had created for them. Captain Mox looked up at the human who had risked everything to save them. You could have died, Mox said, his translator conveying the awe in his voice. Dan removed his helmet, careful to stay within his own sealed section of the hold. He smiled at the alien captain. But I didn't, and neither did you. That's what counts. The cargo hold of the Wanderer had never been designed to house passengers, especially not 8 alien refugees. Dan had converted the space as best he could, setting up a sealed environment with the correct atmospheric mix for the Viren. A transparent barrier separated his section from theirs, allowing them to see each other while breathing their own air. Captain Mox sat nearest to the barrier, watching as Dan worked at a small control panel. The human's face showed signs of exhaustion, dark circles under his eyes, but he continued to check and adjust the environmental systems. Is the atmosphere stable? Mox asked through the communication system that allowed them to speak across the barrier. Dan nodded. Should be. My ship's computer is monitoring the levels constantly. He looked up at the alien captain. How is your crew? Mox turned to survey his people. Dr. Rin moved among them, checking each one with her portable medical scanner. The youngest crew member, Jib, still looked weak, but his color was improving. The others were resting, some already asleep from exhaustion. They will recover, Mox said. Thanks to you. Dan shrugged. We still have a long way to go. The nearest station that can handle your atmospheric requirements is at Outpost 47. That's about 3 days from here. 3 days in this cargo hold. Engineer Trell had approached the barrier. Her technical mind was already analyzing their situation. Will your environmental system maintain our atmosphere that long? Dan hesitated before answering. Honestly, I'm not sure. The system wasn't designed for continuous use like this, and we're low on some of the chemical components needed to maintain your methane-nitrogen mix. The truth hung in the air between them. They might have escaped the dying Starfall asterisk, but they weren't safe yet. What are our options? Mox asked. Dan scratched his beard thoughtfully. There's a small mining facility about 14 hours from here. It's not equipped for Viren visitors, but they might have the chemical components we need. Is it our best choice? Mox pressed. It's our only choice, Dan replied. Without those supplies, the atmosphere in here will start breaking down in about 20 hours. Trell clicked her mandibles anxiously. And if this mining facility doesn't have what we need? Dan met her compound eyes. Then we'll figure something else out. I didn't pull you off a dying ship just to let you suffocate in my cargo hold. The confidence in the human's voice was reassuring, even if his words couldn't completely dispel their worry. Mox had learned that humans often displayed this strange mix of optimism and determination, even in dire situations. It was either admirable or foolish, perhaps both. We should all rest while we can, Dr. Rin suggested, joining them at the barrier. Our bodies need time to recover from the oxygen deprivation. Mox nodded agreement. The doctor is right. We should conserve our energy. Good idea, Dan said. I'll need to monitor the ship's systems, but I'll try to rest too. He stood up from the control panel. The food dispenser is on the far wall. It's programmed with what little data I have on Viren dietary needs. It's basic, but it should provide nutrition. As the Viren settled into rest, Dan returned to the cockpit of his ship. He slumped into the pilot's chair and rubbed his eyes. Computer, status report, he ordered. Engine efficiency at 72% after emergency acceleration. Fuel reserves at 61%. Cargo hold environmental system stable, but operating at 94% capacity with current load. Dan frowned. That's higher than I'd like. Can we reduce the strain on the system? Negative. Current atmospheric requirements for Viren passengers cannot be maintained at lower capacity. What about our course to the mining facility? Any issues? Course plotted and stable. Estimated arrival in 14 hours, 17 minutes. Warning. Sensor array detecting unusual energy readings ahead. Dan sat up straighter. What kind of energy readings? Unknown. Pattern suggests artificial origin. Possible vessel or station not on registered charts. This was concerning. Unregistered vessels in this region often meant pirates or smugglers. The last thing they needed was a confrontation while carrying 8 alien refugees in a makeshift life support system. Can we alter course to avoid it? Dan asked. Possible, but would add approximately 6 hours to journey time. 6 hours they didn't have, with the environmental system already struggling. Dan weighed his options carefully. Maintain current course, but run passive scans only. Let's try not to attract attention. Back in the cargo hold, Mox couldn't sleep despite his exhaustion. He watched the human through the small window connecting to the cockpit. Even from this distance, he could see the concern on Dan's face as he studied the navigation screens. Mox had risked his crew on this human's promise of help. Now they were all dependent on him, not just for the atmosphere they breathed, but for protection in this dangerous sector of space. It was a tremendous leap of faith. Yet somehow, watching the determination in the humans' movements, Mox found himself believing that they would survive this journey. Against all logic, he trusted this strange alien who had answered their distress call when no one else would. The mining facility appeared on the view screen as a collection of rough metal structures clinging to the surface of a small asteroid. It wasn't much to look at. Just a few habitation domes, storage tanks, and mining equipment scattered across the gray, dusty surface. Approaching Waypoint Mining Post, Dan announced over the ship's communication system. Everyone should secure themselves. The docking might be rough. In the cargo hold, Captain Mox and his crew found places to brace themselves. The makeshift living space Dan had created for them had served its purpose, but the environmental systems were now struggling. The air had become stale and hard to breathe. "Will they help us?" Trell asked, her voice showing the strain of their journey. "They'll help," Dan replied with more confidence than he felt. "I've done business with the manager here before." The Wanderer shuddered as Dan aligned it with the mining facility's small docking bay. With careful maneuvering, he guided the ship into position and engaged the docking clamps. A dull thud resonated through the hull as the connection was established. "Stay here," Dan instructed the Viren. "I'll go negotiate for the supplies we need." He sealed his section of the cargo hold and made his way to the airlock. Before leaving, he checked the environmental readings one last time. The system was operating at 98% capacity now. They had perhaps 6 hours before it would begin to fail. The station manager, a burly man named Corva, was waiting when Dan emerged from the airlock. "Miller," he greeted gruffly. "Wasn't expecting to see you out this way." "Change of plans," Dan replied. "I need supplies, urgently."